Hello and welcome to Question Time. I'm Omkar Goswami. In the 1980s, when my guest was given charge of the family construction company that he heads today, it had a princely revenue of 3 crore and about twice as much as debt. He's moved a great deal since, through grit, hard work, charm, and he will also say luck. For the first 9 months of 2008-09, his company earned a revenue of 8,756 crore and an operating profit of 447 crore. Meet Atul Punj, chairman of Punj Lloyd. Atul, thanks very much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me.
Going back a long time ago, the first project that you got, if I recollect, was to manage an insulation project in Iraq. And as you got the project, the Iraq-Iran war broke out in 1980.
Yeah, that was in 1979 when I went to a place called Khor al-Zubair, which is about 80 kilometers southeast of Basra, which is where the port of Qasr is, where was the LPG storage terminal that was being constructed. And the family business at the time was industrial insulation. And I was there for about 9 months, and it did end with some real excitement. We did witness dogfights over our heads with the Iranian Phantoms and the Iraqi MiGs fighting each other. We'd have to run out into the desert, stick our face in the sand. And then, of course, managing the evacuation. I think the family businesses together had a few thousand people in the region between North Rumaila, Basra itself, Khor al-Zubair, and being the only family member on site. I was presumed to be the one in charge at 21 or 22, I forget what I was then. Yeah, that was exciting times.
And then you came back, it was a trial by fire, and you came back and you said, like hell, I'm going to be wrapping wool around other people's pipes. So you decided to bid for a project, if I remember right, it was for Hindustan Petroleum, a 100-kilometer pipeline somewhere between Bombay and Pune.
Correct.
And when you bid for that project, you had to answer a question, and I quote, "Young man, has your company ever welded 2 pipes before?" Unquote.
Yes, that was Lavraj Kumar, who was the then secretary. He's no more now, but yes, it was the shortest meeting I'd had in my life. Yeah, I think to a large extent, I mean, one persisted with that project and one successfully got it. And at the time when the family's largest single contract was 1.29 crores, if I remember correctly, the Mathura refinery insulation contract, this was a 7.5 crore contract. And at 24, when you succeed with that, the arrogance of youth kicks in. It's a different matter that by the time the project was about halfway through, I'd lost about half the value of that project. So our losses were about 3.5 crores rupees on that project by the time we were done. And in a joint family business, you go from zero to hero to zero very fast. And that's exactly what happened to me.
And then there was the division of the family. You went from hero with this project to zero.
Right.
And then the division of the family took place and you got the construction business,
yeah,
which was hardly any business and a lot of debt.
Yeah, well, what happened was we had 2 divisions in the family, one in 87, the other in 89. In 87, our side of the family really got the insulation businesses and the construction division of a company called Punj Sons, which is what I was running. Because the insulation was the largest piece, one had no choice but to retract back into insulation, much as one didn't like it, and ignored the construction business almost completely. But when the division happened the second time in 89 November, all I got was that construction division that I had ignored for the earlier 3 years.
The installation division piece went somewhere else.
Went to other relatives, yes.
Yeah. So you got a construction division which had about 3 crore of revenue and about 5 to 6 crore of debt.
Correct. We had a 3 crore revenue, and the arbitrator in his wisdom, as some people would call it wisdom, apportioned the 5 crore out of the company's debt to this division.
This is the arbitrator who was dividing the family fortunes.
Correct. So effectively that bankrupted me, and effectively rendered me from being a 3rd-generation businessman to a 1st-generation startup. And the problem in people's minds is perception. They believe you to be wealthy when you come with a calling card with a name on it.
A name called Punj, especially if you're from Delhi, you're expected to be wealthy. You live in Lutyens' Delhi.
Correct, but you know the truth was completely the reverse. I spent about 2 years borrowing money in the intercorporate market that was flourishing at the time at 25 to 28, 29% interest rates at 3-month sets. I must have borrowed a few hundred crores at that time, just rolling it over to pay off borrowings, in the belief that we would get one good project and that would turn us around. So that was really what drove me at that time. the belief that we would turn.
And the belief happened when you got an Indonesian project.
Yes, we got
Tell us about this.
Yeah.
You were so broke that you couldn't even go to Indonesia to bid for the project.
Well, no, not quite. We were invited to bid on a project from Balongan to Jakarta. It was a product line, a $13 million project. We sent our people to survey, we submitted the price. And for about 5 months, there was silence from the client side, so we thought it was another failed bid. Out of the blue, we get a call asking us to come to finalize the project. By that time, the situation was so bad, we had no money to send people to finalize the project. At which point, we turned around and said, okay, let's try this one. We asked the client that it's the month of October, great weather in Delhi. We'll show you the Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, the Jama Masjid, and why don't you come and finalize it?
Enjoy the Diwali to boot.
Absolutely, and they did. But that was when the problems really started, because we finalized the project. It was a profitable project. It was going to be the one that turned our fortunes around. But there was no bank that would touch me.
Yeah. According to the stories, you went to 60 or 70 meetings or thereabouts with banks, and no bank was willing to give you a bank guarantee. Why?
Well, they knew I had no security collateral to give. While I may have had the family name, but banks know pretty much the whole story, or the real story.
And this was not a time when they would give money against cash flow. That was no way. You either had security or you didn't get any money.
Omkar, this was the time you have to remember of VP Singh's government, where all that was happening was the mandalization of the country. Okay, so there was nothing that was happening in the country anyway. Everything was in freeze mode effectively. And I met every banker that I could meet, at a manager level, to a general manager level, to a chairman level. Whoever would give me the time, I'd go knock the door. It got to a stage where we got notice that if we did not come up with the facilities within the next 30 days,
The guarantee.
the guarantees and advance payment, performance, etc., the project would be cancelled. Which is when God comes to you in strange ways, and this way it happened with Ramli Nirula.
Yeah, so tell us the ICICI story, because God came in the form of Narayan Vagul.
Well, and Ramli Nirula, because Ramli is the one who pushed me to meet Mr. Vagul when no other. But everybody else in ICICI, and that time it was Kiki and it was a development financial institution, would even look at projects like this. They were not a bank. So she pushed me, good old Ramni, and got me to meet Mr. Vagul. Mr. Vagul was always sat on a sofa. He never really had a desk in his room. This was an old Back Bay reclamation office. Asked me what he could do for me. I told him, I said I had a project in hand which would turn my and my company's future around, but I had no security collateral to give him except my word. And all I could promise him was that if he trusted me, I would never let him down. And based on that, he turned around, picked up the phone, and I don't even know till today who he spoke to. He said, Atul is with me, and give the boy whatever he wants. My face kind of went half size, it shrank, and he then realized his instruction hadn't been forceful enough, which prompted him to press redial, and Mr. Vagul is one of the most soft-spoken men that you'll ever meet, but that's the highest I've ever heard him raise his voice. And he reiterated the instruction, and that's where the story began. So that, as you said, is how God comes to you in strange ways.
Now, you started growing the business. Where, after Indonesia, were your big projects? Because right now, more than almost 2/3, if not 75% of your revenue is coming from abroad. How did you start moving abroad? Was it with Indonesia, or when did the epiphany come that you need to be abroad?
Well, it happened to me as a result of the VP Singh government, where I swore to myself that I would never risk this company on any one country, any one region, any one vertical again. Because what we saw happening then could have very easily happened again, especially in a democracy. So our journey really began from Indonesia. We then traveled to Central Asia, from where we traveled to Turkey, from where we came to the Middle East. Unlike most construction companies, typically travel from India to the Middle East, and that's really been the traditional journey. So we now are in about 19 countries, and as you said, about 80% of our backlog of business today comes from overseas, and we're just continuing to grow it in that manner, which also helps us in the current environment that a lot of other companies in our space find themselves.
So let's look at the different geographies that you're in. You said your journey from Southeast Asia took you to Central Asia. You didn't know anything about Central Asia. How did you start your first business there?
Well, getting into new countries is not an easy task, and it takes a lot of learning, and I think in our company now it's part of our DNA. It's not just me, but it's all the people in the group. If I pick up the phone and say, okay, there's a great opportunity in Bosnia, okay, people will not hesitate to get on a plane and get there and really start working the project. And that, I think, is what makes us unique compared to a lot of other companies in our space.
How did you get into the DNA?
By setting the pace myself, by setting the example myself. I travel 3 weeks a month. I'm in India a week a month, which represents the amount of work that we have in India and overseas. India continues to be our headquarters in a sense, which is where our entire overhead is based. But definitely it is an important market for us, but it is not our only market.
Give me an example of a Central Asian project. It's a difficult terrain, difficult country. Give me an example of a size of a project that you're doing there and how you're executing it.
Well, we've just completed a large development for Tengiz Chevroil, which is the Chevron Texaco field up in the Caspian, in the Atirao area. You know, the temperatures swing from -40 to +40.
And this is a pipeline project?
This is the oil field development project.
So explain that to the viewers.
Well, it's a project that Chevron Texaco was really running. It was being managed by Parsons Fluor Daniel, and it's a project that we had to get on the bid list for, which itself takes a long time. We are now better known internationally than we were then. It's been a project that's gone on for quite a while. It's just come to a close now. We are now working for the Ajip.
How many people are in this project? How many? Just explain the size of the people, the material, and where does your liabilities begin?
I won't want to get into too much detail for just trying to keep some things as being trade secrets. But Kazakhstan for us is about a $400 million market right now in terms of backlog.
What does backlog mean?
Backlog is the unexecuted portion of our orders. Book is of course much bigger, but the unexecuted portion is about 400 odd million. We're doing a variety of projects there, and most of them around the oil and gas or the process area. We would have currently about 800 to 900 people working in Kazakhstan right now. And it ramps up and down depending on where you are in the construction cycle.
How quickly do you get people? I mean, it may be a bit better now, but one of the biggest problems I've seen in people handling big projects is they just don't get enough feet on the ground.
Well, I think that's where being from India helps. It also helps to have an international reputation. One of the biggest spin-off benefits that we've had by having so much of our work outside is you have to have best-in-class practices, especially as far as your health, safety, and environment are concerned. People is a constant training issue. We have investment on the worker level at Gwalior, where we have a large training institute. On the engineering side, we are setting up a new one at Gwalior now, at the Madhav Institute of Technology. We are also now partnered with the Indian School of Business at Mohali.
We're going to take a quick break, Atul, and when we come back, we'll talk about the rest of the business, the training, the people, and the profits. Right. We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, Atul Punj will be talking to us about the size of his global construction empire, the risks that he is taking, and whether he sees things are being difficult going forward. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Question Time, and my guest is Atul Punj. Atul, we were talking about the Kazakhstan business and the size of the business. Now tell us about each of them. The size of Central Asia. Is Central Asia mostly Kazakhstan?
Central Asia primarily is Kazakhstan. It is the dominant country in Central Asia. Most people don't realize it's a country the size of India geographically and with the population of New Delhi. So
and a huge amount of money, right?
Well, they're very rich in almost every one of the cash minerals, starting from oil, gas, coal, gold, uranium, titanium, you name it, they have it.
Of course, whose prices have all dropped.
Whose prices have all dropped, but their cost of production is generally very, very reasonable. It's not deep water oil that you're extracting that your cost is going to be astronomical. What you have to deal with there is, I mean, the Caspian essentially is like a lake in terms of exploration. The challenges there are more to do with the weather, -40 to +40 in the same place, and it is getting people acclimatized to that environment. It is a culture that still is getting out of the old Soviet grip. It's moving fast. It's got great leadership, and that is really what's making the difference between you know, a lot of the other countries in that Soviet sphere and Kazakhstan.
But do you see a slowdown or the beginnings of a slowdown in infrastructure spend in the Caucasian area because of the fall in price of crude oil and other minerals?
Not really. We are not seeing any signs of a slowdown, and we've been mapping our bidding activity now for the last 8 months now. And we've actually been seeing, it's possibly because of the fact that we are in 18, 19 countries, so you know, we have so many to choose from, but we're generally seeing an upward curve in terms of backlog. Put it in perspective, when we went IPO exactly 3 years ago, our order backlog was $375 million, which today stands at about $4.5 billion. Our revenues the first year, if I remember correctly, were about 3,000 crores.
Sorry, let me say that again. You had $375 million order backlog when you went into IPO 3 years ago, and now it's $4.5 billion,
correct,
right?
You know, so we're seeing a trend, and this is going to convert. So we have a good visibility over the next 18 months for sure, and every quarter we expand that by another quarter. So that's the kind of visibility we have.
How do you see Southeast Asia, which is another place where you have a large presence? I mean, Southeast Asia, Middle East, now increasingly North Africa, you have presence. So how do you see each of these geographies?
See, Omkar, I think one thing we need to be clear is that construction does not equal real estate. Dubai does not equal the Middle East. Okay, there are countries in the Middle East that are carrying on, in fact, increasing spending on a lot of their infrastructure spends. The oil and gas side definitely is moving along. The public infrastructure investments are also moving along quite rapidly. What's falling off is petrochemical investment, okay, and pure real estate investment as in the Dubai model. Okay, these are the two areas that you're really seeing an impact. Like in India, you're seeing the real estate sector also slowing down dramatically. Southeast Asia as well, you're seeing the real estate sector, but fortunately for us, our entire real estate exposure out of $4.5 billion runs at about, if I remember correctly, about $20 million.
Yeah, so just a bit on the real estate, since you mentioned it yourself. I was actually talking about your core business outside of real estate. But you do have a 50-50 venture with the Ramaprastha Group to develop residential complexes.
That's where our exposure is $20 million.
And that's the only exposure that you have in real estate. And that obviously is slowed down.
Yeah.
But tell me also about North Africa. What's happening there? I mean, not too many people know. In the good old days, you knew that there was a lot of things happening in North Africa. Libya, you know, BHEL used to go, Larsen and Toubro used to go. Is it the same level or is it slowed down?
Well, if you ask about Libya specifically, it's a country that emerged from many years of sanctions. They were exporting oil at the same rate that they had pre-sanction. They were not really in a position to develop the fields going forward. But they were banking the cash. They now are trying to play catch up. Okay, so they're a country with large foreign exchange reserves, totally untouched by the crisis as we see it. And they are now looking to really bring their entire infrastructure up to same levels of other countries in the Middle East or other oil-producing exporting countries. So we're seeing that, you know, we can tend to sniff out some of these opportunities. There are about 5 other Libyas that are waiting to be tapped by us.
Do you want to say it or you don't?
No, I would rather not. I would rather not. But yeah, we're actually finding ourselves to be in a pretty place. But at the same time, we wake up every morning and we ask ourselves, you know, pinch ourselves, that is there something we're missing? Why do we seem to be the lone voice or one of the few lone voices out there that seem to be...
You are actually, and that's the question I wanted to ask you. I mean, you yourself said that in IPO you were 375 million, now you're 4.5 billion of the backlog on the order book. You are a lone voice. My first question on this is, are you finding pressure on receivables? Are you getting paid later?
Omkar, 95% of our work, okay, and that statistically we have it, is directly linked with government-owned companies, such as Petronas, such as Aramco, etc., or with international oil companies, okay, like the ExxonMobils of the world or the Totals of the world, etc. We are not finding any problem in getting receivables at this time. In fact, we are finding some clients turning around and giving us some kind of leeway on banking facilities because they feel that the banks have gone into freeze mode, so our ability or people's abilities generally to raise guarantees quickly, all right, may be hindered. You find that with a lot of the Middle East banks. You don't find that with Indian banks, have no problem at all. Singaporean banks, no problem at all. But these are all temporary phases that we're going through. But clients are starting to come back and saying, okay, give us 2-3 different options in your bid. Okay, with facilities, without facilities. Fortunately, we've had total banking support and we're in a good place right now. So
where are the risks that you see? You've gone through ups and downs in your business.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yes.
So, and as you said, you pinch yourself. When you pinch yourself, you're also worried about risk. So where are the risks?
Well, you know, one thing that's lurking in the background right now is the whole stimulus package in America and the Western economies. I don't think anybody has really factored in the impact of a $500 billion spend in America on the infrastructure space. Most of that money is supposed to go into infrastructure. What will they do to construction equipment, to people, to commodities? If one country comes out with that kind of a spend, which is something we're trying to figure out as we speak.
Oh, so yours is a good worry that...
Well, it could become a bad worry because if commodities spike, construction equipment deliveries go back to where they were a year ago, okay, it could become a bit of a stretch, okay? Because $500 billion is a lot of money, okay, which for any country to spend. And knowing the US, they do things at a large scale, and they will do this one as well on a large scale.
Nearer home, how are you finding infrastructure spends, particularly in pipeline and construction space?
Our problem in India is systemic. It's not to do with finance. Our problem in India is the fact that year on year you have ministries returning unspent rupees, okay, to the finance ministry. And I wish India would use this crisis as an excuse or a reason to fix the systemic problems that we have in all these ministries because they can't spend what they've been allocated.
Why is this so? I want you to, everyone talks about this as a systemic problem. You actually see it where the rubber meets the road. So tell us 2 or 3 reasons why this systemic problem persists and what they are.
Well, you see, let's say, an international oil company or a national oil company overseas, like Petronas, etc. Once they take a decision to move ahead on a project, okay, they then factor in all the risks when they approve the project and approve the budget. In India, what happens is that halfway through the implementation of the project, if there's a change in the oil price, people will tend to start relooking at the fundamentals of it. Now, you relook at the fundamentals of a project, all right, where you should have taken sensitivities of different oil prices into account, all right, you then lose valuable time, okay, in the execution of it. Why is Reliance able to execute their project at such breakneck speed? Because once they take a decision, it just rolls out. There's no questions asked. Okay?
So what you're saying is, if it were a public sector company and the oil prices fell and they were thinking of a 600-kilometer pipeline, they would suddenly slow down on the that doesn't make sense.
But if it's gone to construction phase, they would not. But if it's just before the construction phase, they would again start reinventing the whole wheel. Okay, that's a classic problem. On the highway side, it's just the nature of the tendering process, the qualification process, okay, the terms and conditions. I mean, if you look at the record on the highway side, it's been very poor.
Do you think that the highway tendering process is actually attracting poor contractors?
It's attracting almost no contractors as we speak. You know, especially the BOT projects. The terms and conditions have been unbankable. The financial regime has been uncertain. We, for one, didn't pursue any BOT projects because we weren't certain about the interest rate structure.
Last question. India, bullish or bearish for the next 2 years?
I'm bullish. I am bullish.
May you
Maybe a lone voice, but I'm bullish.
May you be true.
Thank you.
Atul, thank you so much for being on the program.
Pleasure.
That was Atul Punj talking about infrastructure, talking about his company, and talking about how he has spread his risk across the globe in order to reduce the chances of a downside. Thank you very much for watching Question Time. Till the next program, see you.